Hi everyone. So in this video we're going to be bringing in spreadsheets into our software, and this is probably the handiest feature that Google Maps Pro and Google Maps Lite offers, because it allows us to bring in a large quantity of data all at once rather than having to map features manually or using search. Okay, and the main concepts we're going to be covering in this video are what is an attribute, again, and then also preparing spreadsheet data. And we're going to break it up into the following tasks. So first we're going to look at attributes and fields in a spreadsheet. Then we're going to look at some spreadsheet limitations. And finally we're going to look at importing a spreadsheet. Okay, so we're going to start out over here in a new map. So I've done a little bit of prep beforehand. I'm naming this map Graduation Campsites, and so this map is going to be displaying different campsites around Middlebury. I've chosen to limit the data to Addison County, which is the county with, you can see it right here on the map. This is what Middlebury is within this county in Vermont. And we're going to be looking for sites with at least 12 tents available eventually. This is so we can fit everyone. One thing we didn't talk about when we were navigating around our map in our last video was this little icon over here. So a CSV file is an Excel file. So Google Maps Pro and Lite will take either an Excel file or a Google spreadsheet, which is what we're going to be using for this kind of import. So we're going to get to importing it first, but let's take a look at our raw data. Okay, so this is going to be the spreadsheet we're going to be using, as I said. This is a spreadsheet of all the camping sites within Addison County, which we'll eventually use to create this, this completed map over here for the 12 tents available. And I got this data from VCGI, which is the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and then from there I just selected features that are within Addison County. So the way a spreadsheet is organized and the way it's going to be displayed spatially is up here, the first row are what we're going to call our field names. So these are our column headers. These are describing the kind of attribute data that is stored in each column. And each of these rows is going to be its own separate feature. So row number 2 is going to be its own feature. It has a geometry shape. That's what shape means. It's a point. Its site name is Lake Dunmore, Campersville. It's telling you whether it's public or private, etc. So each one of these is its own feature, which means we have, so it says we've got 13 rows, but remember we're not counting our field names, so we have 12 features stored in this particular spreadsheet. And so all of this data, all this here, basically everything that is in our field names is considered our attribute data. So we'll see that if you remember how attribute data pops up from our last video, this will be what's going to be displayed. So we'll look at that in a minute. And then over here we've got our location, which is going to be what we're going to use to spatially locate each of these features. So you can see it's got the name of the campsite, the town, and then the state right over here. So this all sounds great, but unfortunately there are some major constraints on the kind of data that we can bring into Google Maps. So let's take a look at the field called shape right over here, which I just mentioned, which describes the geometry type of each feature. And what do you notice? They're all points, right? So that brings us to the first major limitation, which is that you can only import points into Google Maps Engine Pro and Lite. So any polygons or lines that we want to create have to be created manually. Unfortunately, we can't bring those in a shapefile. So the second limitation, you'll notice, let's look at this again. So if we wanted to use a different field, a different column to locate our campsites, let's say we wanted to use, I don't know, site name. What would be the problem if I put this into Google Maps? What do you think would happen? I think what would happen is that it would be confused as to which Lake Dunmore, Campersville you meant. So there could be another one in a different state or in a different town. So it's important to note that anything that you use as your spatial locator field, and every spreadsheet should have one, it has to be in a format, a spatial format that Google can understand. So it has to be an address. In this case, we're naming a kind of a service, so that's good enough. It could be latitude or longitude, and you're allowed to use more than one field to denote spatial location. So you see how I have my site name, the co-town, so Middlebury or Addison or whatever it was, and then the co-state over here in my location field. So I could select multiple fields in order to import this data, and I could in fact select each of those fields individually. So I could, in the little box, check off site name, co-town, and co-state Vermont. And luckily Google is smart enough that it will put those three together, and they don't have to be in the same column, which is pretty handy. Okay, so that's the second limitation over here. You can only bring in data with spatial attributes that Google understands, so addresses, Latin long, and really be sure that your data has that kind of spatial information, otherwise it's going to be useless and you can't bring it in. Okay, another quick thing is you have to have the field titles, these guys right here, they have to be in the first row. They can't be in the second or the third, even if everything else is exactly the same, because Google won't like that. I think fourth is that you can't include these characters, which I've put at the bottom. So you can't include greater than or less than signs, you can't include square brackets, curly brackets, or that little vertical line thingy. Oh, I forgot one other character. You can't include commas. So none of these can be in your field names. It's okay if they're in the rest of this data, but make sure none of them are in this first row. So make sure that your spreadsheet doesn't have those particular characters. And then the final thing is that depending on whether you're using low or pro or light, sorry, you have certain row limitations. So in light, you can use up to 100 rows, whereas in pro, you can import up to 2,000 rows, which is not going to, either way, not going to be a problem for this particular spreadsheet since we only have 13 rows. I'm going to get rid of these real quick so that I can actually import this data. Okay, so back to the map. Let's bring this data in. I'm going to title my layer first. This is just going to be campsites. I'm going to say import. So it's going to load. So here you can either choose a Excel file from your computer, or you can go over to here and choose a spreadsheet from your drive, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose the spreadsheet. Quick thing, if you don't have pop-ups enabled on this site, then you won't be able to continue after the step, so make sure your pop-up blocker is not working for Google Maps Pro. I'm going to hit select. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be asked to do is to choose columns to position your place marks, and this is what you want to select here is your spatial field. So in my case it was location. This is where I had all my addresses, and this is a really handy thing. You can click on the question mark and it'll actually show you a little sample of what the data looks like. So notice I've got the name of my campsite and then the town and the state, so that should work out okay. And then I'm going to say continue. And then I have to choose a column to title my markers. So this is what the name that will show up over here on the left-hand menu. I'm going to title them based on site name, which was just the names of the different campsites. It didn't have the town and the state. And then I'm going to hit finish, and let's see how it does. Pretty cool, huh? So notice it just immediately brought in all of that data for us. We didn't have to create any features. We didn't have to search for anything. It was pretty handy. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this data that we imported. So you'll notice we can click on any of these features we created, and it's got all of our attribute data there. So remember, these were our our fields, our column headers across our spreadsheet. And here's all that associated attribute data for the particular feature. And one really handy thing is that you can actually still see your spreadsheet while in the map by, okay, did you see what I just did? Sorry, that was kind of fast. So I went over to my layer, and then I clicked on data, view and edit data in a table form. And here's my exact spreadsheet. Looks exactly the same as this guy did. How cool is that? And you can just go in there and you can edit data right from here. So that's pretty cool. Just remember, so bringing in data with Excel spreadsheets is a very handy feature of this software, but there are some major limitations, so make sure you know what they are, and that way you can troubleshoot before you get any data problems. All right, I will see you guys in the next video.